The cold CEO Millionaire awoke from sedation to the poor girl's voice. Her report exposed a lethal cover. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The first thing Ethan Caldwell feels is not pain but sound. A soft, steady rhythm cutting through a heavy fog. The distant beep of a monitor keeping time like a patient metronome. And then, clearer than anything else, a voice, calm, measured, unmistakably human, reading numbers with quiet care, blood pressure stable, oxygen holding, response improving. The words landing gently, as if they know he's listening, even before he does. Ethan has ruled boardrooms larger than football fields and signed contracts worth more than small towns. But in this moment, he owns nothing at all, not even his own breath. And the strange thing is that he isn't afraid, because the voice keeps going, not rushed, not rehearsed, just present, explaining what his body is doing as if it matters, as if he matters beyond a name on a chart. The fog thins, and he senses light through his eyelids, a warm glow filtered through glass, and the scent of clean linen mixed with antiseptic, familiar yet distant, while the voice lowers, shifts from formal report to something softer, almost conversational, telling him that it's early morning, that the storm outside passed overnight, that the room is quiet now, that recovery takes patience and patience is something they can practice together. Ethan doesn't know who she is. Only that she sounds young and steady and unafraid, and that her words feel like a hand on his shoulder anchoring him to the present, pulling him back inch by inch from a place without edges. Somewhere beyond the haze, he senses movement, a clipboard lifted, a pen scratching, a careful pause as if she's double-checking a line that doesn't sit right. And for the first time since the procedure, a flicker of awareness sparks, a question without language. Why would anyone take this much care? The voice resumes, noting small improvements and subtle inconsistencies, choosing accuracy over convenience. And in that choice something shifts, because Ethan's instincts, honed over decades of risk and reward, recognize integrity the way sailors recognize stars. He wants to open his eyes, to see the owner of the voice, but his body refuses, heavy and slow, and the voice seems to understand, reassuring him without being asked, telling him there's no rush. That progress comes in steps, measured and honest, not the flashy kind that looks good in headlines. Outside the room, the hospital hums with quiet efficiency. Elevators whisper, carts roll, but inside this small space, time narrows to breath and sound, and the voice continues, documenting, verifying, refusing to skip a line even when it would be easier to move on. That's when the hook tightens, because beneath the calm cadence is something else, a careful insistence, a refusal to accept what doesn't add up. And though Ethan cannot move or speak, his mind latches onto that insistence like a lifeline. He doesn't know it yet, but the report she is reading, the one she is quietly correcting as she goes, will matter far beyond this room, far beyond recovery charts and morning rounds, because it carries the first crack in a story that was never meant to be questioned. And as her voice guides him closer to waking, it also guides the truth toward daylight, setting in motion a reckoning that will change both of their lives. Lily Harper had not planned to be anyone important that morning. She had planned to finish her shift, clock out quietly, and catch the number 14 bus back to her apartment before the afternoon heat settled over the city. But the private wing of the hospital had a way of stretching time, especially when you were the lowest paid person in the room and the only one who noticed what others skipped. She moved carefully beside the bed, adjusting the intravenous drip by a fraction of an inch, watching the clear line for any change, counting breaths the way she always did, steady and unshowy, because that was how she survived, by being thorough when no one was watching. Lily had grown up learning that mistakes cost more when you were poor, that if you wanted to keep a job you showed up early, spoke softly, and double-checked everything, even when people higher up told you not to bother. The chart in her hands felt heavier than paper, filled with numbers that should have aligned neatly, but did not, and she frowned, not in accusation but in concern, because concern was safer than suspicion. Around her, the room hummed with quiet luxury. Machines newer than anything she had ever owned. Sunlight filtered through tinted windows. A faint scent of polished wood and fresh linens. All of it designed to make powerful people comfortable. She was not powerful, just careful. Lily remembered the training videos that said to defer, to escalate only when necessary. And she remembered the last time she had ignored her instincts, and how that patient had ended up back in the emergency room 2 days later, frightened and alone. She would not do that again. She read through the sedation log, slowly, lips moving just enough to feel the rhythm of the words, noting the dosage times, the intervals, the handwritten initials that did not match the typed names, small details that most people dismissed as clerical noise. To Lily, details were not noise. They were the only language the truth spoke. She glanced at the man in the bed, the famous face stripped of certainty, lashes resting against pale skin, chest rising and falling with mechanical patience, and she felt a quiet resolve settle in her chest. Not dramatic, not brave in the movie sense, but steady, the kind that came from knowing you had to live with your choices long after a shift ended. She documented what she saw, carefully and completely, resisting the urge to soften the language, because she had learned that clarity was a form of respect, even when it made people uncomfortable. Somewhere down the hall, a physician laughed with a visiting executive, voices carrying easily, confident, assured, and Lily felt the familiar distance between her world and theirs, a distance measured not in feet, but in assumptions. She finished her notes, signed her name in neat, even letters, and flagged the chart for review, knowing it might earn her nothing more than an irritated glance, knowing it might earn her worse, but also knowing that if she stayed silent, she would be complicit in something she could not name yet. When she returned to the bedside, she spoke again, not because anyone asked her to, but because it felt right. Updating the patient on his progress as if he were awake, as if accountability mattered even when no one could respond. Her voice did not shake. She did not know that inside the stillness, Ethan Caldwell's mind was listening, grasping at fragments, sensing that the calm voice belonged to someone who was not impressed by his reputation, someone who cared more about what was correct than what was convenient. Lily adjusted the blanket, smoothed a corner, and took one last look at the chart before stepping back, unaware that this quiet insistence on accuracy was already beginning to disturb a carefully constructed narrative, unaware that by doing her job the way she always had, she had just stepped into the path of something much larger than herself. Lily Harper settled into the rhythm of the private wing as the days folded into one another, morning light giving way to the softer glow of afternoon, then the muted calm of night, and through it all the steady presence of machines marking time more faithfully than any clock. She returned to the same bedside with the same quiet diligence, checking vitals, recording responses, speaking updates aloud because consistency mattered, because people mattered, even when they could not answer back. The routine was not glamorous, but it was honest, and Lily had learned that honesty showed itself in repetition, in doing the small things the same careful way every time. She read aloud the chart entries she made, explaining what each number meant in plain language, noting progress and pauses without drama, keeping her voice even so it would not carry fear into the room. Somewhere beneath the sedation, Ethan Caldwell drifted closer to the surface, not enough to open his eyes, not enough to move with intention, but enough to sense patterns, to recognize that the voice returned at regular intervals, that it never rushed past uncomfortable truths, that it did not flatter him or assume he was unaware. When Lily adjusted his hand to prevent stiffness, she felt a subtle change, a faint resistance that vanished as quickly as it appeared, and she did not gasp or celebrate. She simply noted the time, the measurement, the conditions, and continued, because she had been taught that excitement could cloud judgment. Later, reviewing the sedation schedule again, she noticed the same discrepancy she had seen before, a timing gap that repeated across entries. Small enough to be overlooked, significant enough to demand explanation. She did not accuse anyone, did not whisper conspiracies. She asked questions in the margins with neat handwriting, requesting clarification, requesting confirmation, trusting process even as she tested it. The hospital responded with polite delays, with assurances that specialists were involved, with instructions to focus on assigned duties, and Lily nodded and complied while still documenting everything. Because compliance and awareness were not opposites, they were parallel tracks. She spoke to Ethan about patience, about how recovery was rarely a straight line, about how the body sometimes answered before the mind was ready, and as she did, his heart rate steadied. His breathing found a more natural cadence, small shifts that mattered even if no one announced them. On the third evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Lily paused mid-sentence when she saw it. A minute change in pupil response that did not match the official prognosis, a sign that suggested awareness was closer than expected, and she felt a calm resolve settle in again, the same resolve that had carried her through long shifts and short paychecks, through being underestimated and overlooked. She double-checked the measurement, then checked it again, speaking each step aloud, anchoring herself in method. And when she finished, she added another note, precise and unembellished, stating only what could be supported. In the quiet after, Ethan's mind latched onto the steadiness of her process, to the fact that she did not celebrate what could not yet be proven. And for the first time, he understood that trust was being built not through comfort, but through rigor. Lily smoothed the blanket, lowered the lights to a softer setting, and reminded him that rest was part of progress, that even leaders needed time to heal, a statement she delivered without irony, without deference, as if leadership were simply another human role that did not exempt anyone from biology. She stepped out briefly to submit her update, passing framed awards and silent corridors, aware of how small she felt in this place and how necessary her work remained, then returned to the bedside to resume the routine, unaware that each careful entry was tightening a thread that would soon pull at assumptions far beyond the room, unaware that the patience she practiced daily was quietly preparing both of them for a truth that could no longer be delayed. Lily Harper felt the shift before she could explain it, a subtle tightening in the routine she had come to trust, as if the room itself had grown more watchful. It began with a delayed response from the system when she entered new data, a brief pause before acceptance, nothing dramatic, just enough to make her check twice. She reviewed the latest lab results against the previous entries and noticed the same pattern repeating, a mismatch between reported sedation levels and physiological response, not large enough to trigger alarms, but consistent enough to form a question that would not let go. Lily did what she always did when something fell off. She slowed down. She measured again, recalibrated the monitor, verified the time stamps against the nursing log, and spoke each observation aloud as she recorded it, grounding herself in process. The room answered with its steady beeps and soft airflow, while the man in the bed remained still, his breathing even, his presence quietly commanding despite his vulnerability. She thought about the training manual that emphasized efficiency and the unspoken culture that rewarded speed, and she chose accuracy instead, because accuracy was the only thing she could fully control. When she compared the entries side by side, she saw it clearly now. The intervals did not align with the stated protocol, and the adjustments made afterward were framed as routine, too neat, too uniform. Lily did not assume intent, but she did assume responsibility, the responsibility to ask why. She flagged the discrepancy formally and requested clarification through the appropriate channel, using careful language, neutral and precise, and then she waited, continuing her care as if nothing had changed, because professionalism did not require panic. Hours passed without response. A senior nurse glanced at the chart and suggested that private wing cases often followed customized plans, her tone light, dismissive, well-meaning, and Lily nodded, thanked her, and returned to the bedside. She spoke to Ethan again, explaining the day's readings, choosing words that respected his dignity even in unconsciousness, and as she did, she noticed a subtle change in his breathing pattern, a brief pause that suggested awareness hovering just out of reach. She documented it, then reviewed the medication schedule once more, tracing each line back to its source, and that was when the second detail emerged, a correction entered after the fact, and signed, time adjusted to fit expectation rather than reality. Lily felt a calm weight settle in her chest, not fear, but resolve, because she had seen this before in smaller ways, corners smoothed to keep things simple, truth edited for convenience. She copied the relevant entries into her own notes, exact replicas, no interpretation, just facts preserved as they were, and secured them according to policy, knowing that clarity today could prevent confusion tomorrow. Outside the room, voices moved through the corridor, confident, purposeful, and Lily felt the familiar sense of being invisible, which this time felt like an advantage. She returned to Ethan's side and adjusted the light, speaking softly about the importance of rest, about how the body communicates in small signals that deserved attention, and somewhere beneath sedation, his mind registered the seriousness in her tone, the absence of performance. He sensed that something was being protected, not him as an asset, but him as a person. When Lily finally received a response to her inquiry, it was brief and unsatisfying, a reassurance that protocols were being followed and that further questions were unnecessary. She read it once, then again, and saved it without comment. She did not argue, did not escalate prematurely. She simply added the response to the growing file of observations, because the truth, she believed, revealed itself over time when given room. As her shift ended, Lily took one last look at the monitors, confirmed stability, and spoke a quiet update, reminding Ethan that progress was real even when answers were incomplete. She stepped out of the room carrying nothing visible, but inside she carried the certainty that something important had been uncovered, not a dramatic revelation, but a thread, thin and precise, waiting to be followed, and she knew that following it would require patience, integrity, and the courage to remain steady when others preferred silence. Lily Harper noticed the change at the start of her shift, not because a monitor alarm sounded or a chart demanded attention, but because the room felt different, quieter in a way that suggested anticipation rather than rest. She approached the bedside with the same measured steps, greeting the patient by name as she always did, explaining what she was checking and why, because habit created continuity, and continuity created trust, even when trust was one-sided. As she adjusted the sensor near Ethan Caldwell's wrist, she felt it again, not resistance this time, but intention, a faint tightening that did not disappear immediately. Lily paused, counted silently, then repeated the movement to confirm what her instincts suggested, and when it happened again, she did not smile or gasp. She simply acknowledged it out loud, noting the response with the same calm precision she applied to everything else. She spoke clearly, telling him what she observed, telling him that awareness sometimes returned in small steps, telling him that there was no pressure to move faster than his body allowed. The monitor reflected the change almost reluctantly, heart rate shifting within safe parameters, breathing deepening with a more natural rhythm, and Lily documented each detail, time-stamped and exact, because this moment deserved accuracy more than celebration. When she reached for the pen to sign the entry, Ethan's fingers moved again, this time unmistakably, curling slightly as if testing the weight of the world. Lily froze only long enough to ensure she was seeing what was real, then she responded with professionalism, speaking reassurance, adjusting support, and signaling for assistance without urgency, because urgency could turn hope into confusion. A physician entered, then another, their expressions shifting from routine to alert curiosity, and Lily stepped back just enough to give space while remaining present, answering questions with facts rather than interpretation. When Ethan's eyes fluttered open, it was not dramatic, not wide or searching, just a narrow opening as if he were peering through a doorway he did not yet trust, and his gaze did not settle on faces or lights, it settled on sound. Lily realized he was looking toward her voice, tracking it with fragile concentration, and she spoke again, telling him where he was, telling him that the procedure was over, telling him that recovery was underway and that he was safe. His lips moved, forming a word that did not quite arrive, and Lily did not rush to fill the silence, understanding that silence was part of listening. The physicians exchanged measured looks, pleased but cautious, and one of them noted the progress with professional approval, already thinking ahead to protocols and timelines. Lily, however, remained focused on the present, on the man who had just crossed a threshold with effort and trust. Ethan's eyes closed again briefly, then opened with more certainty, and this time his gaze held, confusion giving way to recognition of tone, if not identity. He squeezed Lily's fingers, weak but deliberate, a confirmation rather than a plea, and Lily felt the weight of that moment settle over her, the quiet understanding that he knew her voice, that it had anchored him when nothing else could. She responded by grounding him further, explaining the next steps, the monitoring, the rest required, choosing words that respected his intelligence without overwhelming his fragile state. As the room settled back into a controlled calm, Lily completed her report, including every response and observation, because this awakening was not just a milestone, it was evidence that contradicted earlier assumptions and timelines. Ethan drifted into a lighter sleep, his features relaxed but alert beneath the surface, and as Lily adjusted the blanket and dimmed the lights, she sensed the beginning of something irreversible. He had awakened to her voice, yes, but he had also awakened into a situation that did not align with the story he had been given, and somewhere behind his tired eyes, questions were already forming. Lily stepped back, maintaining her professional distance, unaware that in that first fragile moment of awareness, Ethan Caldwell had not just returned to consciousness. He had identified the one person in the room whose words he would trust above all others. Lily Harper adjusted to the new rhythm carefully, aware that everything had changed and yet nothing could be rushed, because awakening was not the same as recovery, and trust could be fragile when the mind was still piecing itself together. Ethan Caldwell remained quiet for long stretches, eyes open but unfocused, absorbing sound before meaning, and Lily respected that by speaking only when necessary, explaining each step with the same calm cadence that had guided him back. She told him what time it was, how long he had been resting, what sensations were normal, and which ones she was watching closely, grounding him in facts rather than assumptions. Ethan listened more than he spoke, his voice hoarse when he finally managed a word, asking her name as if it were an anchor he needed to hold. Lily answered simply, without title or embellishment, and he repeated it once, testing the sound, committing it to memory. Over the next hours, his awareness sharpened in small increments, and with it came questions, not about business or headlines or the outside world, but about the room, the machines, the notes she carried on her clipboard. Lily responded honestly, careful not to overwhelm him, explaining that his progress was promising, but that there were inconsistencies she was still reviewing. She did not accuse or speculate. She presented information the way she always did, clearly and without drama, and Ethan noticed the difference immediately. He had spent his life surrounded by people who softened bad news or exaggerated good news, but Lily did neither, and that steadiness built a quiet confidence he found himself relying on. When other staff entered the room, their voices took on a different tone, respectful but efficient, focused on protocols and schedules, and Ethan felt the contrast sharply, the way conversations shifted when authority was presumed. Lily remained the same, neither deferential nor dismissive, and he began to understand that her strength did not come from position, but from principle. As the day wore on, Ethan asked for the chart, and Lily hesitated only long enough to ensure he was ready, then explained what he was seeing line by line, translating medical language into clear terms. When he noticed the same discrepancies she had flagged earlier, his brow furrowed, and Lily met his gaze steadily, acknowledging what was there without telling him what to think. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, it was thoughtful, and in that space a partnership began to form, one based not on power but on shared attention to detail. Ethan asked her what she recommended, and Lily chose her words carefully, reminding him that her role was observation and reporting, that decisions belonged to the care team, but that accuracy belonged to everyone. He nodded, accepting that boundary with surprising ease, and she sensed that this was a man who understood systems deeply enough to respect their limits. As evening approached, Ethan grew tired, the effort of awareness catching up to him, and Lily guided him back toward rest, explaining that healing required patience and that clarity often came after sleep. Before his eyes closed, he thanked her, not with the grand gesture she imagined he might be known for, but quietly, sincerely, as one person to another. Lily felt the weight of that gratitude, heavier than praise, and she returned it with reassurance, promising to continue watching closely, to continue documenting exactly what she saw. When he slept, his breathing settled into a calm rhythm, and Lily reviewed her notes once more, adding details about his responsiveness, his questions, his ability to track information. She knew these observations mattered, not just medically but contextually, because awareness changed the meaning of everything that came before. As she finished her shift, she paused at the doorway, looking back at the man who had awakened into uncertainty and possibility, aware that their connection was professional and yet deeply human. Ethan Caldwell was no longer just a patient, and Lily Harper was no longer just a voice in the dark, and though neither of them named it, both understood that trust had been established in the most unlikely way, through honesty, restraint, and the courage to see what was actually there. The atmosphere in the room changed the moment the visitors arrived, not because they spoke loudly or moved with urgency, but because the air filled with assumption, the quiet confidence of people used to being obeyed. Ethan sensed them before he saw them, the shift in cadence, the way staff straightened and softened their voices, the way conversations narrowed to essentials. A tall man stepped forward with an easy smile and familiar posture, introducing himself as a family member with practiced warmth, followed by two impeccably dressed advisors whose eyes cataloged the room without appearing to. They spoke about recovery timelines and public reassurance, about minimizing stress and maintaining privacy, phrases that sounded reasonable and felt rehearsed. Lily stood slightly to the side, holding her clipboard, listening more than speaking, aware that this was not her space to lead, but still her space to observe. Ethan listened as well, his mind clearer now, recognizing the shape of corporate language the way a musician recognizes a key change. When questions turned toward medication and protocol, Lily answered directly, stating facts without commentary, and one of the advisors nodded politely while steering the conversation back toward outcomes. Ethan noticed what was not asked, the lack of curiosity about discrepancies, the eagerness to close loops quickly, and he felt a familiar caution rise within him. He asked for a moment, his voice still weak but steady, and the room paused, surprised by the request. He asked Lily to walk him through the timeline again, slowly, and as she did, he watched the faces around him, noting who listened and who waited. Lily kept her tone even, her words precise, pointing out what was documented and what remained under review, and the family member smiled, reassuring everyone that the best specialists were involved and that trust was paramount. The word trust landed heavily, and Ethan met Lily's eyes briefly, seeing there the same restraint she had shown since he woke, the same refusal to dramatize. He thanked the visitors for their concern and asked them to coordinate next steps with the medical team, signaling an end without confrontation. As they left, the room exhaled, returning to its measured quiet, and Lily resumed her duties without comment. Ethan sat with the aftertaste of the exchange, aware that influence had entered the space, not aggressively, but insistently, and he understood that his recovery now carried expectations beyond health. He asked Lily what she thought, and she chose honesty within bounds, saying only that clarity benefited everyone and that unanswered questions tended to grow louder over time. He nodded, appreciating the way she respected her role while not abandoning her principles. Later, as the day settled and the private wing grew still again, Ethan asked for his phone, then set it aside untouched, realizing that information would come soon enough. He asked Lily to continue documenting exactly as she had been, to keep asking the questions that needed asking, and she agreed without hesitation, reminding him that process protected people when power complicated things. As evening light softened the windows, Ethan reflected on how quickly the room had filled with certainty and how easily certainty could become pressure. He realized that the story being told about his condition was neat and complete, while the truth was still unfolding. Lily adjusted the monitor and spoke an update, her voice calm and factual, and Ethan recognized that in a world now pressing inward, that voice remained unchanged. He rested then, not because the questions were answered, but because he trusted that someone was paying attention to the right details. Outside, arrangements were being made and narratives aligned, but inside the room, accuracy continued its quiet work, and both patient and caregiver understood that the next phase would test more than recovery, it would test resolve. Lily Harper began the deeper review the way she handled everything else, quietly and methodically, fitting it into the margins of her shift where no one thought to look. She requested access to archived logs under the pretense of continuity of care, a reasonable need that raised no alarms, and when permission was delayed she waited, documenting the delay with the same care she applied to vital signs. When access arrived, It was partial, enough to be useful but not enough to feel generous, and Lily accepted it without comment, understanding that fragments often told the clearest stories. She compared entries across systems, cross-checking medication timestamps against monitoring data, noting patterns rather than anomalies, because patterns could not be dismissed as error. The same corrections appeared again and again, always smoothing outcomes, always aligning narratives, and never accompanied by clear explanations. Lily kept her language neutral in her notes, using exact phrasing and verifiable measures, because she knew that credibility lived in restraint. Ethan noticed the change in her presence, not anxiety but focus, the way she moved with purpose while maintaining calm, and when he asked what she was seeing, she chose transparency with care, explaining that the data suggested adjustments made after the fact, and that such adjustments required context. He listened closely, absorbing information without reacting, the way he did in high-stakes negotiations, and asked her to continue exactly as she had been, to gather facts without alerting anyone unnecessarily. Lily agreed, reminding him that patient care came first, and that any review must not compromise recovery. Over the next day, she traced the path of the sedation orders, noting where responsibility shifted and where documentation thinned, observing that certain names appeared consistently at decision points while others disappeared entirely. She did not draw conclusions, but she preserved evidence, saving copies according to policy, labeling them clearly, ensuring that nothing relied on memory alone. When a supervisor suggested that Lily transfer to a different assignment to balance workload, the suggestion arrived wrapped in courtesy and concern, and Lily thanked her while asking to complete the current cycle for continuity. The request was granted with a smile that did not reach the eyes, and Lily understood that attention was narrowing. She adjusted by becoming even more precise, double-checking entries, speaking updates aloud, making her process visible and unassailable. Ethan observed how easily systems attempted to redirect effort without issuing direct orders, and he recognized the tactic immediately, the quiet reshaping of access that left no fingerprints. He asked Lily whether she felt pressured, and she answered honestly that pressure was subtle and that subtlety was often the point. He respected that answer, trusting her judgment and her limits. As evening approached, Lily reviewed the camera access logs for the private wing, not to surveil people but to verify timing, and she found gaps that aligned too neatly with the corrected entries. She documented the gaps without interpretation, listing times and durations, attaching references, and saving the file securely. Ethan read the summary she prepared, his expression thoughtful rather than angry, and he asked one simple question, whether the information could stand on its own. Lily answered yes, because it was factual and complete, because it did not rely on intent or motive. That answer mattered to him, because it meant the truth would not require embellishment. When a request came down for Lily to reduce narrative detail in her reports to streamline communication, she complied in form but not in substance, maintaining clarity while removing nothing essential. Ethan noticed the shift and smiled faintly, appreciating the balance she struck. He rested that night with a clearer sense of the landscape, aware that recovery and revelation were unfolding together, each dependent on patience and precision. Lily completed her final checks, spoke her update in the steady voice he had come to trust, and left the room knowing that what she had gathered was enough to ask for accountability when the time was right. Neither of them spoke of outcomes or consequences, because they understood that the strength of the work lay in its quiet completeness, and that completeness, once presented, would speak louder than any accusation. Lily Harper felt the pressure increase without a single explicit warning, the kind that crept in through changed routines and softened instructions, through access that narrowed by inches rather than miles. Her badge opened fewer doors now, not denied outright, just delayed long enough to be inconvenient, and her requests returned with polite notes suggesting alternative workflows. She adapted by planning better, by finishing essential checks earlier in the shift and reserving the margins for review, because margins were where truth survived. When she arrived at Ethan Caldwell's room that morning, she found a new face at the nurse's station assigned to the private wing, friendly and efficient, already familiar with the schedule as if it had been rehearsed. Lily greeted her, exchanged the necessary information, and continued on, aware that presence itself had become a signal. Ethan noticed it too, the extra pauses, the way staff spoke around details rather than through them, and he asked Lily whether she was being moved. She answered carefully that assignments were fluid and that continuity was valued, which was true in principle if not always in practice. Later that afternoon, a supervisor stopped by with concern wrapped in praise, commending Lily's diligence while suggesting she take a few days to rotate elsewhere to avoid burnout. The words were considerate, the timing was not. Lily thanked her and asked to complete the current phase of care to ensure stability, citing documented progress and pending reviews. The supervisor hesitated, then agreed with a smile that did not commit to anything beyond the day. Lily returned to the bedside with the same calm she had always shown, speaking updates clearly, documenting responses precisely, refusing to rush. Ethan listened, hearing steadiness beneath restraint, and understood that time was being managed around them. He asked for the summary Lily had prepared, and she handed it to him, reminding him that it was factual and that any escalation should be measured. He appreciated the counsel because he recognized the pattern, the way organizations attempted to protect themselves by dispersing focus. That evening, while Lily reviewed a final set of logs, her screen flickered and refreshed, access resetting unexpectedly. She saved her work immediately, then verified that her files remained intact, making duplicates where policy allowed. She did not react outwardly, because reaction was what pressure wanted. Instead, she documented the interruption and moved on. In the corridor outside Ethan's room, voices carried briefly, a low conversation between advisors discussing communications and alignment, the importance of consistent messaging, the risk of confusion. Ethan heard just enough to understand that decisions were being shaped beyond the clinical frame, and when Lily returned, he asked her to sit for a moment. She did, keeping her posture professional, and he told her plainly that he trusted her work and that he did not want it compromised by urgency. Lily responded with equal clarity, stating that patient care and accuracy were her priorities and that she would continue to operate within them. She did not promise outcomes, only process. The next morning, Lily arrived to find her name missing from the assignment board for the private wing, replaced by another, competent and courteous, but unfamiliar with the thread she had been following. Lily took this in, without visible reaction, then requested a brief handoff to ensure continuity, which was granted after a pause. She spoke to Ethan, explaining the change without editorial, assuring him that she would remain available if needed. Ethan met her eyes and asked one question, whether the documentation was complete. She answered yes, because she had ensured it would stand independent of her presence. He thanked her, again quietly, and she felt the weight of that gratitude settle, steadying rather than sentimental. As she stepped back, Lily understood that distance had become the test, not of courage but of discipline, and she trusted that the work she had done would continue to speak even if she was asked to be silent. Ethan watched her leave the room, aware that influence often worked by separation, and he resolved to protect the integrity of what had been gathered. In the stillness that followed, both understood that the moment for clarity was approaching, and that restraint now would make truth harder to dismiss later. Lily Harper returned to the private wing under a narrow window of authorization, not as the assigned caregiver, but as a witness requested for clarification, and she walked in with the same measured calm that had carried her through every earlier decision. Ethan Caldwell had been cleared to sit upright for short periods, his strength returning in careful increments, and when he saw her enter with a slim folder held close to her chest, he understood that the moment he had been preparing for had arrived. He asked for the room to be limited to essential staff, his voice steady and clear enough now to command attention without strain, and the request was honored after a brief exchange of glances. Lily placed the folder on the table within reach, explaining what it contained without embellishment, a chronological set of records preserved exactly as created, timestamps aligned, corrections highlighted only where documentation required explanation. Ethan asked her to proceed, and she did, walking through the sequence slowly, connecting monitoring data to medication logs, showing how revisions appeared after outcomes rather than before, and how camera access gaps aligned with those revisions. The room grew quiet, not tense but focused, the kind of silence that followed facts when they were allowed to stand on their own. A physician asked whether alternative explanations had been considered, and Lily answered yes, listing them clearly and explaining why the data did not support them, her tone respectful, her posture open. Ethan listened without interruption, then asked for the system audit reports he had requested earlier, which were brought in and placed beside Lily's documentation. He compared them line by line, nodding once as patterns aligned. When an advisor suggested that this level of detail could create confusion and recommended a simplified summary, Ethan declined, stating that clarity reduced confusion and that the records were clear. He asked Lily whether anything had been altered or omitted to strengthen her case, and she answered no, because the truth did not need reinforcement. That answer mattered, and it shifted the room. Ethan then addressed the care team, thanking them for their work and stating that an independent review would be initiated immediately, not as an accusation but as a safeguard, because safeguards protected patients and institutions alike. The phrasing was careful, chosen to invite cooperation rather than defensiveness, and Lily recognized the strategy, the way he framed accountability as continuity rather than disruption. A pause followed, and then a quiet agreement, one by one, because the documentation made denial impractical. Ethan asked that Lily's records be included in full and that she be present for any questions, recognizing her role without elevating her beyond it. Lily accepted with a nod, emphasizing that her priority remained patient care and accuracy. As the meeting concluded, arrangements were made for an external clinical audit and a parallel compliance review, timelines set with specificity, responsibilities assigned transparently. The advisors adjusted their posture, recalibrating to the new direction, and the air in the room lightened not because conflict had vanished, but because it had been addressed with structure. Afterward, when the room emptied, Ethan thanked Lily privately, acknowledging that her discipline had given him the leverage to act without spectacle. She responded by reminding him that process worked best when leaders protected it, and he agreed, stating that protection would be ongoing. As Lily prepared to leave, Ethan asked one final question, whether she would have proceeded if he had not awakened when he did. She answered honestly that she would have continued documenting until the record was complete, because that was her responsibility. He smiled faintly at that, understanding that the most effective exposure had not come from force or outrage, but from patience applied with integrity. When Lily stepped back into the role was acknowledged privately and appropriately. He understood that protection sometimes meant not placing someone under a spotlight they did not ask for. As his discharge approached, arrangements were made carefully, ensuring follow-up care and clear communication. Ethan asked Lily what she wanted next, and she answered honestly that she wanted to keep doing her job well, that advancement mattered, but integrity mattered more. He respected that answer, offering support without pressure, resources without conditions. On the morning he was cleared to leave, Ethan stood slowly, testing his balance, and Lily stood nearby, ready but unobtrusive. He thanked the care team publicly for their professionalism, then thanked Lily quietly for her discipline, acknowledging that trust had been earned through restraint. She accepted with a nod, reminding him that systems worked when leaders listened to the details. Outside, sunlight reflected off glass and steel, the city moving forward as it always did, and Ethan felt a grounded resolve settle in, a commitment to carry the lessons of his recovery into every room he entered. Lily watched him go, returning to her routine without ceremony, documenting, measuring, speaking updates aloud, because that was how change endured. In the weeks that followed, audits concluded, training improved, and the private wing adopted clearer protocols, not as a response to crisis, but as a standard. Ethan returned to work gradually, his leadership quieter and more attentive, and Lily continued her shifts, her methods unchanged. They did not seek each other out, but when their paths crossed, there was an understanding that required no explanation, a shared respect born from patience and truth. The story did not end with applause, but with alignment, with systems corrected and people protected, and in that outcome, both found a satisfaction deeper than victory, the knowledge that healing had extended beyond one body to the structures meant to care for many. The rhythm of recovery settled into something steady and human, marked not by charts alone, but by routines that felt earned, morning walks measured in careful steps, physical therapy sessions paced by patience, and conversations that grew longer as strength returned. Ethan Caldwell found himself lingering at the hospital longer than required, not out of fear, but familiarity, the space having transformed from a place of vulnerability into one of clarity. Lily Harper noticed the change without naming it, the way he asked more questions about process and fewer about outcomes, the way he listened with the same attention he once reserved for boardrooms. Their interactions remained professional, but warmth threaded through them now, built from shared respect and time rather than urgency. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered softly through the windows, Ethan asked Lily to join him for a short walk to the garden terrace, cleared by his care team as part of rehabilitation. The distance was modest, the pace unhurried, and Lily walked beside him without guiding or leading, letting him set the rhythm. They spoke about small things, the weather turning mild, the quiet satisfaction of progress, the discipline required to rebuild without rushing. When they reached a bench overlooking the courtyard, Ethan sat carefully and rested, breathing evenly, and Lily checked his pulse out of habit, then smiled faintly when everything registered as it should. Ethan reached into his pocket and removed something simple, a clear hospital wristband, the one he had worn through the most uncertain days, now clean and flattened, its printed details faded but legible. He held it carefully, explaining that he had kept it as a reminder of when listening mattered more than speaking, when survival depended on trust rather than control. He told her that the first thing he truly recognized upon waking was her voice, not because it promised comfort, but because it promised truth. Lily listened, attentive and grounded, understanding the weight of his words without needing to dramatize them. Ethan said that leadership had taught him how to make decisions, but recovery had taught him how to choose people, and that choice, he admitted, had changed him. He did not kneel or raise his voice. He simply asked, clearly and respectfully, whether she would consider building something real together, not defined by titles or rescue narratives, but by the same principles that had guided them through uncertainty, patience, honesty, and mutual regard. Lily felt the moment fully, the quiet gravity of it, and she responded with the same clarity she brought to her work, saying that she valued intention over spectacle and that trust grew best when protected. She accepted, not with a rush of emotion but with a steady certainty, understanding that commitment, like healing, unfolded over time. Ethan smiled, relief and resolve blending into something enduring, and he offered the wristband as a symbol, not of illness, but of the beginning of their understanding. Lily took it, fingers brushing lightly against his, aware of how far they had come without crossing lines, how their bond had formed in discipline rather than desire. As they returned inside, the hospital around them continued its work, unaware of the significance of the exchange, and Lily resumed her duties with the same focus as always. In the days that followed, plans took shape quietly, conversations about balance and boundaries, about supporting each other's goals without overshadowing them. Ethan returned to his work with renewed perspective, investing in systems that rewarded accuracy and care, while Lily advanced steadily, her methods now recognized and adopted more broadly. Their relationship remained grounded, built on respect and shared values rather than rescue or obligation. When they left the hospital together for the first time without schedules or clearances, the city felt different, not grander but more precise, full of details worth noticing. They walked side by side, unhurried, understanding that the most meaningful commitments were not declared in moments of drama but proven in the quiet consistency that followed, and that healing, once begun with a voice in the dark, had grown into a life shaped by truth, patience, and chosen trust. Time did what it always did when given room. It settled things into place, smoothing urgency into purpose and turning decisions into habits that endured. Months later, the hospital garden bloomed again, tended by hands that understood patience, and Lily Harper walked its paths with the same quiet attention she brought to every day. Her role had expanded naturally, responsibilities added because process demanded it, not because she asked for recognition, and she continued to teach by example, speaking observations aloud, documenting clearly, protecting accuracy as a shared value. Ethan Caldwell moved through his work with a different cadence now, meetings shorter and more focused, decisions framed by data and humanity rather than speed alone. He invested in systems that elevated care and accountability, not as a response to crisis, but as a standard, and when asked what had changed, he answered simply that listening had improved outcomes. Their life together unfolded without spectacle, defined by routines that felt chosen, morning walks that began slowly and lengthened over time, shared meals where conversation favored curiosity over control, and evenings spent reading or planning the next day with equal regard for both schedules. They protected boundaries intentionally, honoring Lily's commitment to her profession and Ethan's responsibilities, understanding that balance was not static but practiced daily. When questions arose about how they met, they answered honestly without embellishment, saying that trust had grown from work done carefully and with respect. The hospital adopted clearer protocols inspired by Lily's methods, and training programs emphasized documentation integrity and transparency, changes that reduced errors and improved outcomes across departments. Ethan attended a dedication ceremony quietly, standing at the back, content to see systems strengthened without his name centered. Lily continued to mentor new staff, reminding them that diligence was not about perfection but consistency, that speaking clearly protected patients and colleagues alike. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Ethan asked Lily what she wanted the future to hold, and she answered with the same steadiness that had guided her through uncertainty, saying that she wanted a life built on truth, service, and time enough to do things right. He agreed, recognizing that the most meaningful commitments were those renewed daily. They chose a simple celebration when the time came to formalize their partnership, inviting family and a few close friends to a quiet gathering that reflected their values. There were no grand speeches, only gratitude expressed plainly, and when Ethan spoke, he thanked Lily for teaching him that leadership was an act of care measured in details. Lily thanked Ethan for protecting process and people when it mattered most. The hospital wristband remained tucked away in a small box, not as a relic of illness, but as a reminder of listening in the dark, of how a voice grounded in truth could guide someone back. As seasons turned, their shared purpose remained steady, expressed in small choices and consistent action. Ethan continued to champion audits and transparency, and Lily advanced thoughtfully, her influence extending through practice rather than proclamation. They built a home that welcomed quiet mornings and honest conversations, understanding that healing did not end with recovery, but continued wherever integrity was practiced. On an ordinary afternoon, walking side by side through the city, they paused at a crosswalk, sunlight reflecting off windows, the world moving around them with familiar rhythm. There was no need to look back at what had been overcome or ahead to what might come next, because the present felt complete. The journey that began with careful notes and a steady voice had resolved into a life shaped by